Looks to me like the demonstrators are either moving out or moving or changing locations.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most headline-making, attention-grabbing moments from the last half-century.
We have rang the alarm bell loud and clear.
Number 50, Malice at the Palace. The beauty about live sports is that anything can happen. Not only is the game's outcome completely unpredictable, but so are the players' behaviors. The so-called Malice at the Palace occurred on November 19, 2004 during a game between the Indiana Pacers and the Detroit Pistons. With about 45 seconds left, Pacers player Ron Artest fouled Piston Ben Wallace, prompting Wallace to shove him violently.
Team tonight. Ben Wallace is fouled, and Wallace did. Wallace right at Artest.
The players got heated, and after a fan threw a cup at Artest, the fight spread into the stands.
Just jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench.
9 players were suspended, 10 people were charged with assault, and the NBA implemented many new reforms to prevent future incidents. In short, it's one of the worst fights in sporting history.
What a disgraceful showing from the Pistons fans here.
Number 49, the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. Just a few short months after the Reagan assassination attempt, another shocking event occurred when Pope John Paul II was critically wounded by a bullet in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City.
The Pope arrived to welcome the crowd of 10,000. After getting some preliminary shots, Askew moved into position for a closer view.
The attempt on the Pope's life occurred in full view of thousands of people gathered in the square and millions more watching live on television. As the Pope rode through the crowd in his open vehicle, Mehmet Ali Agca fired several shots, striking the Pope in the abdomen.
Askew stopped filming to receive the blessing, and a moment later, the shots rang out.
The immediate aftermath, including the swift response by Vatican security and bystanders to aid the Pope, was broadcast live. Pope John Paul II was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery, eventually making a full recovery.
Pope John Paul II said from his hospital bed that he forgave, quote-unquote, the brother who struck me.
Number 48, the landing of JetBlue Flight 292. JetBlue Flight 292, an airplane traveling from Burbank to New York, made headlines on September 21, 2005.
The tower confirmed that the front wheels of the plane were twisted 90 degrees.
The pilots discovered a malfunction that stopped the plane's landing gear from retracting. This prompted an emergency landing at Los Angeles International Airport. However, there was too much fuel in the plane, which posed a dangerous risk upon touchdown. As a result, they had to fly over Los Angeles for hours, drawing the attention of national news outlets.
So the wheels are literally sideways. At this point in time, they hope to make a safe landing, but they do expect the front to probably snap.
Many viewers, including those on the plane itself, tuned in to watch the developments. What could have been a fiery crash that cost lives ended up a safe, if rather sparky, landing. Luckily, no one was injured in the ordeal.
There's the sparks that they predicted would occur.
Number 47, the San Francisco earthquake. The Loma Prieta earthquake, striking on October 17, 1989 with a magnitude of 6.9, became one of the most memorable disasters of the 1980s, partially because it occurred just as the third game of the World Series was about to begin at San Francisco's Candlestick Park.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. Power has been interrupted temporarily in the park.
The quake caused significant destruction across the Bay Area, particularly in San Francisco and Oakland. It was responsible for the collapse of the Cypress Street Viaduct in Oakland, where 42 people lost their lives, and the partial collapse of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge.
What about the Bay Bridge? What's wrong with it?
The upper deck appears to have collapsed during that earthquake.
Live television broadcasts captured the chaos, including the swaying of the bridge and the dust clouds enveloping the collapsed structures, hastened the retrofitting of infrastructure across California.
So many people felt helpless that night, no way of knowing where their loved ones were, whether their loved ones were even alive.
Number 46, Mike Tyson bites Evander Holyfield. If we tell you to name a famous moment in boxing, chances are you'll quickly mention the Mike Tyson ear bite.
The sense of anticipation as before the first fight is almost palpable. Here we go, fight 2, round 1.
The fight was between Tyson and Evander Holyfield, and they were battling for the WBA Heavyweight Championship. It took place in the MGM Grand Garden Arena and was broadcast live pay-per-view. However, the fight ended in a startlingly anticlimactic but legendary manner when Tyson bit off a piece of Holyfield's hearing organ.
What happened here?
Tyson was disqualified, ending the bout in less than 3 full rounds.
Look out, he's pushed right here!
But when the initial disappointment wore off, it left behind an iconic piece of pop culture history.
Fight. When did we get that on tape?
Number 45, Mount St. Helens eruption. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington state, resulting in one of the most catastrophic volcanic events in the history of the United States.
That crater was blown out by a steam explosion. Lava has not yet made it to the surface. It seems very likely that this is actually a precursor to an eruption.
The eruption was preceded by a 2-month series of earthquakes and steam venting episodes, signaling imminent volcanic activity. The actual eruption began with a massive landslide on the volcano's north face, triggered by a 5.1 magnitude earthquake, leading to the exposure of the volcano's magma chamber and a colossal lateral blast.
Mount St. Helens finally blew this morning with a boom heard 150 miles away.
This explosion flattened vegetation and buildings over 230 square miles and hurled ash up to 80,000 feet into the air. Broadcast live, this dramatic natural disaster caused 57 deaths and extensive damage to property and the surrounding landscape, with ash dispersing across 11 U.S. states.
Prevailing winds blew the cloud in a northeasterly direction, plunging communities 60 miles away into complete darkness.
Number 44, Olympic marathon runner is tackled. It was the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens, and Brazilian runner Vanderlei Gilima was hoping to score big in the men's marathon. Gilima was leading the race by around 25 seconds when he was attacked by an Irish priest named Neil Horan. Horan, who is also referred to as the Armageddon priest, had become infamous for disrupting sporting events to propagate his belief of a fast-approaching apocalypse. The Irishman shoved Gilima off the track and into the crowd, subduing him until he was pushed off by a spectator. As a result, Gilima lost his composure and the lead, eventually finishing in 3rd place. Horan was later dismissed from the clergy.
I went slightly too far, I must say, and I've apologized many times for possibly depriving him of the gold medal.
Number 43, the assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. On March 30th, 1981, the United States was shocked when President Ronald Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. outside the Washington Hilton Hotel.
Not fired, rawhide is okay. Actually, we want to go to the emergency room of George Washington.
The assassination attempt also wounded Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and police officer Thomas Delahanty. Viewers watched as the chaotic scene unfolded, seeing Secret Service and law enforcement swiftly react to protect the president and subdue the assailant.
Hinckley, they say, wanted to kill the president and gain fame to impress actress Jodie Foster. They say he was obsessed with Foster and watched her movie Taxi Driver 15 times.
Reagan was quickly rushed to George Washington University Hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. This event significantly influenced the Secret Service's protective procedures and had a profound impact on national television audiences, who had never before seen an assassination attempt unfold in real time.
The Secret Service relies on a perimeter system of protection. The outer is a preliminary check by local police. The middle has Secret Service agents searching for weapons.
And then there's the inner perimeter, and that's the final defense.
Number 42, the Vancouver Stanley Cup riot.
Vancouver, transformed into a war zone.
The Vancouver Canucks may have one of the most infamous fan bases in sports history. In 2011, following the professional ice hockey team's loss to the Boston Bruins in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, fans took to the streets. They rioted, setting fire to cars and looting several businesses.
I think it's a disgrace to our city. I think it's not what true fans are, what we are as a city.
An estimated 140 people were injured that night, with 112 local shops losing approximately $2.7 million to theft and damages.
People are already starting to clean up, though, and glass repair trucks are literally everywhere.
The berserk backlash played out on television screens across the nation and around the world, causing many to ask themselves how and why the fervent fans were able to get so out of hand.
The fans arrived long before most of the police.
Number 41, the death of Dale Earnhardt. We all know how dangerous NASCAR can be, but that still doesn't prepare you for what can happen when things really do go wrong. A titan of the sport, Dale Earnhardt, along with his son Dale Earnhardt Jr., made sure the surname was synonymous with the sport of race car driving, which is why his sudden death during the last lap of the Daytona 500 was so surreal for millions of viewers. As the footage shows, Earnhardt's car made slight contact with another car, causing him to lose control and slam into the wall at around 160 miles per hour. Sadly, emergency responders were unable to revive him, and suffice it to say, Earnhardt's death prompted further safety measures to be enforced. Number 40, the invasion of Iraq.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people.
The Iraq War was extensively covered in the media, and much of it was captured on live television. The invasion began in March of 2003, and viewers were given an uncomfortable glimpse into the realities of war. Gunfire echoed and explosions rocked the air, sending plumes of black smoke drifting into the night sky. It was a nightmarish scene, like something out of Apocalypse Now. For many, this footage served as the end of an era, or maybe the beginning of one. The drama continued throughout the months, as audiences were soon shown a televised documentation of Iraq President Saddam Hussein's statue being toppled on April 9th.
A great roar came out from the cloud. There it goes. It is falling down to the ground.
Number 39, the launch of the MP3. Have you ever heard the song Tom's Diner by Suzanne Vega? Either way, you will never think of it the same way after this. It was that song used by scientist Karl-Heinz Brandenburg to build the algorithm behind the MP3 audio file due to its clarity and Vega's voice.
I'm definitely proud of it, and I still sometimes feel like in a dream, can this really be true? Now we see MP3 everywhere.
Introduced in 1995, this new digital format allowed songs to be compressed by as much as 12 times their original size. This triggered a tsunami-sized change in the way consumers would acquire music. People immediately began ripping their CDs to MP3 files and sharing them through online apps like Napster.
It was on college campuses with high-speed internet that Napster really took off in the fall of '99.
So how many MP3s do you have on your computer? About 600.
Maybe like 100 or something?
6,000 or 7,000.
Eventually, more legal means were developed to acquire digital music, and the likes of iTunes and Spotify were born. Number 38, the wedding of Charles and Diana.
There she goes, up the steps.
On July 29, 1981, Diana Spencer married heir apparent Charles, Prince of Wales at London's St. Paul's Cathedral, and the event could not have been more bombastic. It was made a national holiday in the UK, cost an estimated $100 million in today's money, and saw 2 million spectators filling the streets of London. But that is nothing compared to the 750 million that watched from home.
And now the moment of drama that Prince Charles talked about. The moment of theatricality as we await the arrival of the bride and the groom.
The event was broadcast live in 50 different countries, and legend has it that hundreds of millions more listened on the radio, bringing the worldwide audience to well over 1 billion. If that's true, then 1 in every 4 people on the planet either watched or listened to the wedding of Charles and Diana.
The whole family clustering on the steps of St. Paul's to wave the couple off on their way back to Buckingham Palace.
Number 37, Nelson Mandela released. In 1964, South African revolutionary leader Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. 4 years, he had fought against apartheid, the system of racial segregation that privileged the country's white population and disenfranchised people of color. Even from prison, he remained committed to this cause, communicating with political leaders and gaining worldwide attention.
The fact that you could sit alone and think gave us a wonderful opportunity to change ourselves, your behavior.
As civil unrest grew, Mandela was finally released from prison in 1990, 27 years after he was sentenced. His release was broadcast around the world.
Heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today.
In a historic speech, he affirmed his commitment to peace, but also to the ongoing struggle against the violence of apartheid. Just 4 years later, he would go on to become the country's first black president. Number 36. The euro is adopted. The European Union was designed to allow the free exchange of people and goods among its members.
From this point, each individual country had their own currency set against €1.
This made it much easier for, say, people in Germany to live and work in France. Yet, despite being part of the same union, many of these countries still had their own currency. Enter the euro.
The negotiations in the lead up to the launch were complex. National debt was one sticking point. In the end, member states agreed to limit it to 60% of GDP. That's laid out in the Maastricht Treaty.
Officially launched in 1999, the notes and coins for the new currency were introduced into circulation in 2002.
Over the years, 8 more countries joined the club.
Initially, 11 different currencies were replaced, including the German mark, the Italian lira, and the French franc. Today, the euro has replaced 22 different currencies within the Union. Number 35. Attack on the Dutch royal family. It's astounding how one evil act of violence can turn such a happy occasion into one of terror. In April 2009, the city of Apeldoorn in the Netherlands held a parade during the holiday Koninginnedag, or Queen's Day. Queen Beatrix and other members of the royal family were in attendance, and were sadly the targets of an attack carried out by a man in a Suzuki Swift. None of them were harmed by the vehicle, but tragically 7 spectators were killed in addition to the attacker himself. The motive behind the attack remains unclear, but what is clear is just how dark a day this was not only for live TV, but human decency. Number 34. World Health Organization changes tune. The last few decades have seen an enormous shift in the attitudes towards both gender identity and sexual orientation.
I just went to a wedding of a friend of mine who happens to be gay. Because somebody doesn't think the way I do, doesn't mean that I can't care about them or I can't love them.
Wow, a gay wedding just got applause at a Republican debate. Add that to the list of things that would have been unthinkable in 2004.
For many years, anyone who saw themselves as being different from societal norms was considered to be mentally ill or suffering from some other type of sickness. In fact, the World Health Organization once listed homosexuality under their International Classification of Diseases. In 1990, the 43rd World Health Assembly endorsed a decision to have homosexuality permanently removed from the list. The act of a single line removal was administrationally simple, but monumental in its effect. It told the world that such a large organization had switched its perspective on sexual orientation, and that others should follow suit. Number 33. France nuclear ping pong. As far back as 1960, France had been conducting nuclear weapons experiments and testing in both the Algerian Sahara Desert as well as in French Polynesia.
France carried out more than 200 nuclear tests, most of them in the South Pacific.
These tests went on for several decades despite massive international protests. Eventually, the country opted to suspend their testing in 1992.
Researchers, along with the French news site Disclose, used declassified military documents and testimonies to recreate the impact of a number of the tests, calculating around 110,000 people in the overseas territory, including in Tahiti, were contaminated, almost the entire population.
However, in 1995, France elected a new president, Jacques Chirac. He resumed nuclear testing and more experiments were conducted before the country finally put a permanent end to the practice a year later. Number 32. John Lennon is assassinated. It's safe to say that John Lennon is one of the most influential singer-songwriters of all time. Even after leaving the Beatles in 1969, he enjoyed enormous popularity and success. He also became well known for his activism.
Is there not a more positive way of demonstrating in favor of peace than sitting in bed with 3 square meals a day?
Very positive.
However, on December 8, 1980, obsessive fan Mark David Chapman fatally shot him outside the Dakota Apartments in New York City. When news broke on ABC's Monday Night Football, fans were shocked and horrified. For many, the world seemed to stop turning.
An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back.
Around the globe, fans were united in mourning for a man whose music meant so much to so many. Number 31. Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For months, The buildup of Russian forces along Ukraine's border had the world on edge. Would Russian President Vladimir Putin really give the order to invade? In 2014, Ukrainians had revolted against a pro-Moscow government, sick of corruption and abuse of power. Their success led Russia to annex Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. In February 2022, Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, furious at the country's aspiration to join NATO.
I consider it necessary to immediately recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics.
In response, the international community hit Russia with severe economic sanctions. Around the world, everyone's eyes have been glued to their screens, watching the outgunned Ukrainians hold off the invading forces.
If we don't stand up, we don't have a country to defend.
Number 30, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Also known as the BP oil spill, this unfortunately wasn't the first industrial disaster to devastate our marine habitats, but it remains the largest on record. It began on April 20th. Due to an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil platform.
And there's 30,000 of these workers every day that go in the Gulf to do this work, and they're well trained, but and they work to try to not have these accidents. But on this day, something went wrong, and now we're working with BP and we're Transocean to try to find the cause.
The fallout from this disaster resulted in 205 million gallons of oil discharged into the Gulf of Mexico, and effects were still being felt years after the initial disaster.
Birds are still on these islands coming in here feeding. So you can just imagine the contamination that takes place within the wildlife.
In fact, reports from 2012 stated that the oil refineries from Deepwater Horizon were still leaking, despite an official statement from 2010 that claimed the well was sealed. Number 29, the Gaza War. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been ongoing for 3/4 of a century, with the 2023 Israel-Hamas war adding another tragic and bloody chapter.
There are so many families across Israel asking, where was the army? Why didn't they stop this? What do you tell those families?
I tell them it's the responsibility of the army. It's the responsibility of the army for the intelligence. It's our responsibility to guard the people of Israel. We failed on Saturday. This is our responsibility. But now we're fighting.
This latest conflict began when the Palestinian political and militant group Hamas launched a surprise attack on the 7th of October 2023, killing around 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians. They also took 250 Israelis hostage, demanding the release of Palestinian prisoners.
This is a massive terrorist attack that is gunning down Israeli civilians in their towns, in their homes, and as we've seen so graphically, literally dragging people across the border with Gaza.
In retaliation, Israel dropped 6,000 bombs on Gaza over 6 days and launched a ground invasion. Over 47,000 Palestinians have been reported as killed, half of them women and children. There have been widespread global protests, and Gaza has collapsed into a humanitarian crisis. Number 28, the death of Osama bin Laden. In the wake of the September 11th attacks in 2001, U.S. President George W. Bush announced the beginning of a war on terror. The first stage of this war was the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan to hunt down Osama bin Laden and his terrorist group, Al-Qaeda.
In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality.
This manhunt continued for almost a decade as bin Laden evaded capture. However, in 2011, the CIA tracked him down to a compound in Pakistan. In a helicopter raid codenamed Operation Neptune Spear on May 2nd, bin Laden was killed.
After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
For those who vividly recalled the events of 9/11, President Obama's announcement that the Al-Qaeda leader was dead was a landmark event. Number 27, the Waco Siege.
I'm afraid my mom thinks I've lost my mind. Moving in with a Bible study group.
On February 28, 1993, federal agents and Texan law enforcers stormed Mount Carmel Center in Axtell, Texas. This was a compound belonging to a religious cult called the Branch Davidians. They were hoping to serve warrants stemming from the illegal stockpiling of weapons, but the raid instigated a deadly shootout. This, in turn, resulted in the Waco Siege, which infamously culminated 51 days later when the compound burned to the ground. This fire was captured on live television, most notably by CNN, which broadcast some of the more famous visuals from that fateful day. It is startling footage depicting large explosions, a raging inferno, and thick black smoke towering into the air.
This is a non-lethal form of tear gas, and the big question at the moment is, did the gas ignite this fire?
76 Branch Davidians, including leader David Koresh, died in the fire, igniting a ferocious controversy that continues to this day. Number 26, the San Diego Tank Rampage. On May 17, 1995, an ex-Army soldier named Sean Nelson took possession of an M60 tank from the California Army National Guard and drove it through the streets of San Diego. The incident lasted nearly half an hour, with Nelson destroying objects like utility poles, bus benches, and citizen vehicles. Luckily, no one was injured, and Nelson's proved to be the only fatality when he was shot by responding police officers.
34-year-old Sean Nelson had been a tank crewman in the Army, but police had no idea who was at the controls until it was over.
The unique chase was captured by news cameras and televised, with viewers likely glued to the screen to witness this once-in-a-lifetime event. Number 25, Hurricane Andrew. For many years, Hurricane Andrew held some rather unfortunate records. At the time, it was the hurricane that caused the most financial loss in American history, causing $27 billion in property damage.
This is literally a painful experience. This sand is hitting us so hard that it feels like BBs hitting your skin.
It was also the first tropical cyclone in 23 years to make landfall as a Category 5, and it would be the last for another 26 years. Forming on August 16, 1992, and lasting nearly 2 weeks, Hurricane Andrew was extensively covered in the media, with many channels capturing the unbelievable and unprecedented destruction as it occurred.
I had no idea that this kind of power was possible. It's just, you hear about it, but once you experience it.
It all makes for very sobering footage, as water floods streets and human-made structures get battered, ripped away, and destroyed by the forces of nature.
It was a beautiful lodge, but she's gone now. Gone? Hurricane Andrew flattened her flatter and flat.
Number 24, the Manila hostage crisis.
It was the start of an 11-hour drama played out live on television.
Similarly to Vester Lee Flanagan, Rolando Mendoza was someone who took to horrendous tactics to try and rectify what he believed to be mistreatment. Mendoza was a former officer for the Philippine National Police who had been formally let go in 2009 due to charges of extortion.
Family members were brought in to speak with him, but with no result. Paper signs plastered on the bus windows told the story of his frustration, played out so horribly.
In 2010, Mendoza held an entire tour bus hostage in Manila, demanding to be reinstated. After an intense 10-hour standoff, negotiations broke down dramatically, resulting in gunfire. Mendoza took the lives of 8 hostages before a SWAT team was able to deliver a fatal shot of their own. With news outlets covering the incident from start to finish, this was one horrifying event the world experienced in real time.
And while some of the passengers survived, police will now have to answer to the families of those killed, should they have stormed the bus earlier.
Number 23, Ayrton Senna crashes. A 3-time Formula One champion, Ayrton Senna was participating in the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix when he tragically lost his life. No one had died at a Formula One race in 12 years, with the last incident occurring at the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix. During the live race, Senna left the track and struck a concrete barrier at 131 miles per hour. It was immediately obvious that something was wrong, as Senna wasn't moving in the car. An overhead helicopter captured the immediate aftermath, with medical personnel pulling Senna from the car and giving him an emergency tracheotomy. He was rushed to the hospital but died later that night, having suffered severe head trauma. Number 22, the Northridge earthquake. On January 17, 1994, the San Fernando Valley was struck by an earthquake registering at around 6.7 in magnitude.
4 interstates, including California's major north-south freeway, are closed at several points. 3 state highways are blocked. Cars are crushed beneath slabs of concrete. Rescuers have worked all day searching for survivors.
It resulted in more than $20 billion in damage and saw roughly 90,000 buildings of various types either destroyed outright or severely battered. Even an unexpected outbreak of the valley fever hit the area as a result of the quake.
Very dangerous place to be. California is really gotten dangerous in more ways than one.
Oddly enough, exactly 1 year later, another earthquake hit on the same day but across the globe in Kobe, Japan. Registering at a 6.9 magnitude, the quake damaged upwards of 400,000 buildings.
The Kobe disaster forced the Japanese to reappraise just how earthquake-proof their cities really are. They can't change their earthquake-prone country, but the lessons learned from Kobe will save thousands of lives when another major earthquake strikes.
Number 21. Ireland ends ban on divorce. In a world where the vast majority of cultures subscribe to the idea of marriage, it's not uncommon to hear that they don't all work out. For better or worse, divorce is all too common. That is, unless you were living in Ireland prior to June of 1996. Before then, divorce in Ireland was actually illegal. Couples could legally separate, but an actual divorce went against the Constitution of Ireland, which was adopted in 1937. A referendum was held in November of 1995 and won by a nail-biting margin of 50.3 over 49.7% of votes.
The Prime Minister was clearly delighted, but also mindful of the sizable vote against.
There are many valid arguments and valid concerns on both sides of this issue, and at this stage, the decision having been made, it is time for us to come together behind a positive agenda.
Number 20. Live Aid Concert. The Live Aid concert, held on July 13, 1985, was a groundbreaking global music event designed to raise funds for the relief of famine-stricken Ethiopians. This dual-venue concert was held simultaneously at Wembley Stadium in London and John F. Kennedy Stadium in Philadelphia, featuring a star-studded lineup including Queen, U2, Led Zeppelin, Madonna, and many others. Broadcast live to an estimated global audience of 1.9 billion people across 150 countries, the event raised over $125 million for famine relief.
You coming back to me is against the odds, and that's what I've got to face.
The concerts are particularly remembered for their iconic performances and the remarkable live broadcast technology that connected audiences around the world, making it one of the largest-scale television broadcasts of all time.
All we hear, Radio Gaga, Radio Cuckoo, Radio Gaga.
Number 19. The Copiapó Mining Rescue.
As the world held its breath, an unprecedented rescue mission swung into action.
Now, here's a disaster story with an uplifting example of human resilience and teamwork. In August 2010, a cave-in occurred at a copper and gold mine in northern Chile, trapping 33 workers roughly 2,300 feet below the surface.
The headlines around the world reflect the breathless reaction to the drama playing out on TV screens everywhere.
Never before has mankind ever retrieved any living person from this depth.
69 days passed, but through the combined efforts of the Chilean government and various organizations from around the world, all 33 men were winched up safely one at a time, almost entirely unharmed. This being a major story for months, millions of people watched as the tireless efforts of those involved finally came to fruition. Hollywood wishes it could write endings this good. Number 18. The Hubble Space Telescope launch. Despite being built in the 1970s, the Hubble Space Telescope didn't launch until 1990. The delay was attributed to multiple factors, including fiscal constraints, technical difficulties, and the catastrophic Challenger disaster of 1986. But with much fanfare and news coverage, the telescope was officially launched on April 24, 1990 via the Space Shuttle Discovery.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
The mission, titled STS-31, lasted 5 days and drew much public attention. It was also captured by various IMAX cameras, the footage of which appeared in the movie Destiny in Space.
Now, the Orpheus telescope has been released into orbit. We are riding with it.
The successful mission helped re-establish faith in the space shuttle program, and the telescope has gone on to make some of the most important astronomical discoveries of our time. Number 17. The Boston Marathon.
It's being described as pure chaos.
The Boston Marathon is an annual event that takes place in Massachusetts, often held on Patriots' Day. It holds the distinction of being the world's oldest annual marathon, and as such, is broadcast live on television each year. Unfortunately, the 2013 marathon was forever marred by an act of terror in which two brothers planted bombs near the race's finish line.
If you're just joining us now, many people have been injured at the Boston Marathon, right at the finish line line on Boylston Street, where there were 2 loud explosions.
Hundreds of people who attended the once celebratory event were injured, with 3 critically injured. News stations who had been broadcasting the event quickly switched tones to cover the then ongoing investigation. The highly publicized attack infamously led to a number of internet users playing detective and circulating photos of people they had falsely identified as the perpetrators.
Just never could even consider that something like this would happen on this day.
Number 16, the Iran hostage crisis. In 1953, British and American intelligence agencies orchestrated a coup against democratically elected Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized Iran's oil industry. With U.S. support, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi became Iran's true ruler.
The Shah's power is maintained by a vicious secret police and the 5th largest military on Earth, equipped with American weapons.
Fast forward to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and the Shah, seen as a Western puppet, was overthrown, replaced with the theocratic government of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In the middle of this revolution, militarized college students took 52 Americans hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. For over a year, President Jimmy Carter sought to negotiate their return, but only after 444 days were they released, after a pledge from the U.S. not to intervene in Iranian affairs.
It was a long and harrowing ordeal for the hostages, their families, and indeed the entire nation. And it was an ordeal that plagued the presidency of Jimmy Carter, an ordeal whose final resolution eluded his presidency by less than an hour.
Number 15, the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. You didn't need to be in eastern Japan to feel the shockwaves of this disaster. On March 11, 2011, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake began roughly 45 miles off the Japanese coast, causing a tsunami with a wave upwards of 130 feet that absolutely devastated the mainland.
For those of you who are just tuned in and living anywhere close to the coastal areas of Russia, Marcus Island, Northern Marianas, Guam, Wake Island, and Taiwan, please do not go near the waters. Move to higher ground as soon as possible.
As if that wasn't bad enough, the tsunami in turn caused the meltdowns of 3 nuclear reactors in Fukushima, prompting even further evacuations. All things considered, over 19,000 people lost their lives in what was easily one of the most appalling chain of disasters in recorded history.
Entire neighborhoods are underwater, and the world watches as 2 nuclear reactors remain dangerously unstable.
Number 14, the November 2015 Paris attacks. In January 2015, France was left reeling from an Islamic terrorist attack on satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, in which 12 staff were killed.
The attack on Charlie Hebdo last week was Al-Qaeda's most high-profile operation in years. And today, they bragged about it. In a video, Al-Qaeda in Yemen claimed it targeted the magazine for insulting the Prophet Muhammad.
Several other smaller attacks occurred throughout the year. On November 13th, these culminated in by far the deadliest. That night, in a series of coordinated attacks, terrorists detonated explosive vests and opened fire in streets and public venues in Paris.
Only minutes later, gunmen opened fire on several bars and restaurants in eastern Paris.
3 gunmen stormed a concert at the Bataclan Theater, killing 90 people. In all, 130 lives were taken. The attacks sent shockwaves not only through France, but also reverberated around the world. Number 13, the Oklahoma City bombing. This domestic terrorist attack shocked the nation. On April 19, 1995, anti-government white supremacists Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols detonated a truck full of explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
In a blink, the sky dark with a plume of deep black smoke.
There was a tremendous explosion, a massive explosion at the federal building in the center of the city, the A.P. Murrah building.
We have a large column of smoke to be south of this address. Are you going to check on that?
The explosion killed 168 people and injured 680 others. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was left in ruins, and the force of the blast damaged cars and buildings over a dozen blocks away. McVeigh and Nichols had sought to spark a revolution.
McVeigh became disaffected, latching onto a growing pro-gun, anti-government ideology that gained traction in the 1990s in the aftermath of federal law enforcement actions at Ruby Ridge, Idaho.
To this day, it is the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. Number 12, the 2021 United States Capitol attack. On January 6, 2021, scenes of carnage in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C., shocked Americans watching the riot unfold on TV. USA! USA! At a rally before the attack, outgoing President Donald Trump told supporters the election had been stolen and urged them to march to the Capitol building. Debunked by courts, state audits, and federal agencies, this claim was part of a campaign to overturn the election results and reinstall Trump as president.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people.
Within hours, 2,000 angry Trump supporters broke into the Capitol building, assaulting police and searching for lawmakers gathered to formalize Joe Biden's victory. Among them were members of far-right militias and neo-fascist groups, some of them armed. The insurrection failed, with lawmakers racing to safety before the mob reached them. Number 11, the Los Angeles riots. Years of racial tensions and police brutality finally exploded, literally on the evening of April 29, 1992. It began when the 4 officers charged with the beating of Rodney King were acquitted, sparking civil unrest in South Central Los Angeles. The violence and outrage spread from there and covered much of the greater LA area, resulting in 63 deaths, over 2,000 injuries, and $1 billion in property damage.
We are going to wait and see what happens.
The immense looting and destruction of property were extensively covered by the media over the next week.
Look at all the people going back into the store. It's amazing. Now the store is going to fill up with looters again.
Some of the riot's most famous events, including the attack on truck driver Reginald Denny, were broadcast on live TV, despite the horrific violence. Number 10, the COVID-19 pandemic. On March 12, 2020, the World Health Organization announced that the COVID-19 outbreak had become a pandemic.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
At the time, few of us fully understood what it would mean for our lives in the years to come. Nonetheless, the news had people worldwide glued to their screens or running to stock up on groceries, especially toilet paper.
To ensure compliance with the government's instruction to stay at home, we will immediately close all shops selling non-essential goods.
Through lockdowns, the world watched as the virus continued to dominate headlines, and the death toll skyrocketed from the hundreds into the thousands and then millions. The WHO's announcement was the beginning of a long, rocky road for all of us.
Boosters are important, but the most important thing we need to do is get more people vaccinated.
Number 9, the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Although she was no longer Her Royal Highness in 1997, having lost her title after her divorce from Prince Charles, Diana remained a popular figure for the Commonwealth and beyond.
We interrupt this film to tell you we are getting reports that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been badly injured in a car crash in France.
Her sudden death in a car accident as she fled paparazzi occurred in the early hours of August 31st, while the British public were still asleep. Diana's driver, who had been intoxicated at the time, and Egyptian producer Dodi Fayed also died in the crash. When people in the UK woke and learned the news, the country was left shocked and in mourning. The death of the People's Princess was felt around the world.
Goodbye, Rose. May you well grow in our hearts. You are the grace that placed yourself.
Number 8, the Tiananmen Square protests and massacre. In China, references to this event, also known as the June 4th incident, are heavily censored. In the spring of 1989, student-led demonstrations were held in Tiananmen Square, Beijing, calling for democracy and greater civil liberties.
They turned Tiananmen Square, the country's symbol of sovereignty, into a hub of dissent and protest. They want a crackdown on corruption. They want freedom of press. They call for an awakening to reform and progress in China.
The protests spread to hundreds of cities, with workers joining them, angry over inflation, corruption, and the erosion of welfare. Declaring martial law, the government sent soldiers and tanks into the square. The death toll is disputed, ranging from hundreds to thousands.
Estimates run from several hundred to over 10,000. Some argue that by shooting at civilians, the Communist Party lost its legitimacy to rule, and with it, an opportunity for political modernization.
Famously, at least outside of China, the photo of an unknown man facing off against a column of tanks has become an enduring symbol of the event. Today, Public displays of mourning for the victims are banned, although commemorations still sometimes reportedly occur in secret. Number 7. The O.J. Simpson murder trial verdict. It was the trial of the century, and the verdict left the public reeling.
Remember these words. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
After Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were stabbed to death in June 1994, Brown's ex-husband, former footballer and actor O.J. Simpson, became the prime suspect. Before her death, Brown had said that Simpson had abused and threatened to kill her. Every aspect of the case was highly publicized, from the car chase that saw him arrested to the lengthy trial. The coverage hooked viewers, and everyone had an opinion. On October 3, 1995, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
For some, it was a vindication. To others, a travesty of justice, in which a celebrity had gotten away with murder. Number 6. The Chernobyl disaster. At first, the details of this disaster were shrouded in secrecy.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened.
But word soon got out. During a safety test on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat in Soviet Ukraine went into meltdown. The fault of design flaws and negligent operators. The subsequent explosion threw radioactive particles into the atmosphere. It was Sweden who alerted the world 2 days later, when radiation hundreds of miles away set off alarms.
The first word that something was seriously wrong came from this power plant in eastern Sweden, where workers coming on the job registered abnormally high levels of radiation.
As the truth was gradually revealed, the scale of the disaster became evident. The meltdown led directly to the deaths of 31 people, and to many more from radiation-induced cancer in the years afterwards. Number 5. The Fall of Saigon. Seeing photos of the Fall of Saigon, you might be reminded of the more recent 2021 Kabul airlift in Afghanistan. Both involved scenes of panic and powerful images of last-minute evacuation.
The hardest part was the waiting. Many people said it was unnerving to be waiting for a ride to safety and to be hearing fighting all around you.
On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, marking the end of the deadly and divisive Vietnam War. The iconic photo of a helicopter evacuation from the roof of the U.S. Embassy symbolized the desperate and dramatic nature of the fall.
Yes, we've chosen to leave, but we've chosen to leave because it's no longer defendable with the resources that we have chosen to commit, and the limits that we have put on our involvement in South Vietnam.
In the aftermath, Vietnam was reunified under communist rule, and the U.S. began to significantly rethink its foreign policies. Number 4. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. There were a lot of eyes on Cape Canaveral, Florida when Challenger finally launched on January 28, 1986. Due to technical issues and bad weather, the flight had been delayed multiple times.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
On launch day, CNN broadcast live nationwide coverage. NASA had organized for children to watch from schools to promote their Teacher in Space project, which had added teacher-turned-astronaut Krista McAuliffe to the crew. But viewers' hopes turned to horror as the shuttle disintegrated during its ascent, claiming the lives of all 7 crew members.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
The Challenger's final flight had lasted only 73 seconds. Number 3. Hurricane Katrina. This Category 5 hurricane was devastating not only due to its intensity, but also a failure of flood control systems and slow government response. On August 29, 2005, the hurricane made landfall in Louisiana.
It was quickly predicted to become a catastrophic event.
My fear is absolutely that the models are correct.
It is gaining strength again. It is now stalking the Gulf Coast.
It rapidly doubled in size and intensified into a Category 5 hurricane.
The storm surge breached New Orleans levees and flooded the city. Tens of thousands of residents had not evacuated. It didn't matter if you were from there. TV and radio audiences could feel the distress and panic in the air. Critics argued that race and class were factors in the slow local and federal response.
This story ends up being the roadmap, the instruction booklet, the how-to story of dealing with disaster. It also tells you what not to do.
The hurricane left an estimated 1,392 dead in its wake, making it one of the deadliest in U.S. history. Number 2, the fall of the Berlin Wall. After World War II, the Allies split Germany into East and West. The Soviet Union controlled the East, while the US, UK, and France controlled the West. Eventually, East and West became separate republics, but the flight of East Germans to the more affluent West prompted the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961. Dividing friends and families, the wall became a symbol of the Iron Curtain separating Western Europe and the Soviet bloc. In the 80s, however, massive protests and waves of refugees leaving East Germany led the government to relax rules for immigration. On the evening of November 9, 1989, East Germans gathered at the wall.
Elsewhere, they were swarming over the wall, hacking at it with hammers, picks, and chisels, clawing at it with bare hands.
Rather than open fire, border guards stood down, and the world watched as Germany became one again. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, 9/11. Just about everyone who's old enough to remember it can tell you where they were when they heard about the September 11th attacks in 2001.
And we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows.
For New York, it was morning when 2 hijacked passenger jets crashed into and ultimately demolished the Twin Towers as part of a coordinated attack. Another plane hit the Pentagon. After news of a 4th crash came to light that day, it became apparent that the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93 took back their flight and downed the weaponized aircraft before it reached Washington, D.C.
You could hear him yelling, "In the cockpit, the cockpit."
The event claimed close to 3,000 lives, and the world was forever changed.
The other trade center's down. It's down. It's down.
Are you old enough to remember when all of these events happened? How did they make you feel? Let us know down in the comments. Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.